Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me as always is Tara.
Greetings, citizens.
And this is a science fiction movie podcast. We get together every week, we have watched a sci-fi movie, and then we're going to talk about it. It's really quite that simple. And coming up this week, we are doing last month's Patreon vote winner. It is Lucy, directed by Luc Besson, and this is Scarlett Johansson starring. This was a very popular action sci-fi movie that came out in 2014. You probably remember the poster, which is just a big black and white image of Scarlett's face with the big bold text Lucy over her eyes. That is what we're going to talk about. The premise of this one is that a woman is... I mean, we'll get into the specifics in the plot as to how it happens, but ultimately she is able to access more than the typical amount of her brain based on the... what do you call it? The fable?
Old science?
The myth that we only use 10% of our brains. She's going to unlock the rest of it and gradually over the course of the film get more and more skills and abilities because her brain is unlocking and she's using all of it. And so we'll start spoiler free, of course, as we always do, and we'll give you a warning before we get to spoilers. I feel like, I don't know how much of this would be considered spoiler, because I feel like, at least with my own expectations, which I guess I'll talk about in a minute, but with my own expectations, like, this movie wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be when I first saw it, like, 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that... I think that part of that might not necessarily be spoilery to talk about, just because it was probably in some of the trailers a bit more than what I remembered, but at the same time, I feel like I was expecting one type of movie and it vastly went in this weird direction, and that kind of affected how I felt about it at the time. I was very interested to revisit it now, knowing what it was going to be, and see how that would play with my enjoyment and how I felt about it. But was this the first time you had seen this?
No, I saw this movie in the theater. I actually saw this movie during a bit of a crisis in my life, where I just sort of went in blindly because I wanted a movie to cheer me up, and I just picked something that was, whatever the popular thing was. It was something I really enjoyed at the time because it felt really good to watch an empowering woman on screen for an hour and a half or however long it is. And it was just something I really needed at the time. And I knew when I was watching it, like, this premise is really dated and kind of dumb, but I still got really into it. Like, if you accept that the premise is a real thing and just get into the film, like, it was a very empowering film for me to sit through, and just what I needed at the time. And, I knew what it was, and that my reaction to it isn't, if I had watched it at any other time, probably wouldn't have enjoyed it as much.
Well, that leads to an interesting question then, is watching it again now, did you enjoy it as much?
I still would say I enjoyed the movie. Yeah, I think the movie is very stylish. I think all the stuff with Morgan Freeman is a bit dumb because he's supposed to represent the science part of it, and I don't enjoy the science part of it because it doesn't make any sense. But I think Scarlett Johansson's really good in it. I like the multicultural side of the film. I love that the villain just, like, never secretly speaks and understands English at all consistently throughout the film. Like, there's never this turn where he knew it the whole time, like any other movie would have done. So, like, no, there's going to be subtitles for the villain, or sometimes no subtitles because you're supposed to be with Lucy and not understanding what's happening, or just get it from context.
I would say that getting subtitles is the exception, not the rule. I'd say there's more stuff in Korean throughout the film that we don't get subtitles for than we do. Right.
You just have to get it through the context of what's happening. Yeah. So I still really enjoy the film. Like, I think for an action film is quite good. I like I mean, there is something very tantalizing about the idea of that we all have this unlocked potential that we can, with assistance could reach, or with practice could reach and become better and have these superpowers and such. But, I see why Luc Besson, like, made a movie around this, even though the science is quite dated, if you could even call it science. But, I still think that the movie is worth watching.
So my reaction to the film when I first saw it is pretty similar to how I feel about it now, which is I think it's stylishly directed. I think the opening, like 10 minutes or whatever, are great. I was like, oh, this is going to be a great action movie. Like, I think the way it introduces the story and the way it stylistically just goes straight into it and the way it plays it like a sort of action thriller, I think is really good. What's funny for the context of this podcast, a science fiction movie podcast, is the more sci-fi it goes, the more I don't like it. And I would say that the impression I got going in and the way people were talking about it is I was and obviously I wouldn't have compared it to this at the time because it didn't exist yet, but what I was expecting was that, okay, part of her brain unlocks and she basically instantly becomes like John Wick because she can like see where the bullets are going to go, she can like predict the moves, and that's what I thought it was. I thought she was just going to be a badass action hero, and that is like, you know, there for like 10-15 minutes after everything happens, and then it starts escalating, and we get to a point where she's just getting superpowers, and a point where she's so powerful that honestly I just didn't enjoy like watching the stuff anymore. And I think part of the reason for that is not just that she's so powerful that there's no real threat in the action scenes, but it's that she also kind of gets really cold as a character. Like her humanity kind of like goes away, and it felt like, I mean, you mentioned there's a villain, and there is a villain, but after a point he feels kind of irrelevant. It just kind of feels like that's not like she almost like deals with the villain plot like in the first 30 minutes, and then the rest of the movie is like just this sort of general goal because of what's happening to her. And it's at that point where it starts to lose me, I think, and then it just kind of more and more as the film goes on. There's some stuff towards the end that I would describe as like almost like you're watching like Venom. That really, like, I'm just like, what? But at that point it's lost me. At that point it's jumped the shark, and I'm just like, this premise, like, if this, you know, unlocking more of your brain to like have better reactions and have quicker skills, and like if that's all it was, it would still be dumb, don't get me wrong, but I'd be like,
I think there's a Bradley Cooper movie about that.
Yeah, Limitless, I want to say, right? If that's all it was like, okay, unlocks her brain and somehow she's just really good at fighting now. Okay, I would accept that. It would be dumb, but that could make for a fun action movie where she's just really badass and like goes after the guy, you know, the guy who did this to her for revenge. That'd be fun. But that's not what this is. It goes past that in like 10 minutes and then starts to like unravel into like weird philosophical nonsense and like sci-fi stuff that is based on just like, so the best example I can give you for the nonsense in this is that early on in the film, probably a little bit after the first like say 10 minutes, we cut to Morgan Freeman, who is this scientist giving a lecture based on all of his hypothesis about the human brain and how we only use 10%. And he starts saying things like, at 20% we'd be able to do this, and I'm like, how do you know?
It's all hypothetical, right? Though
how would you know, right? And but someone puts their hand up and says, what about 40? Well, at 40 we'd start, it wouldn't just be about controlling our own, because he says at 20 we'd have complete control of our own bodies, meaning we would like be able to like literally just like turn off and on certain systems, and like if you wanted to like sense something you could, because you could sort of focus in on that one sense, things like that. And I'm sure it's more than that, but right, but at 40% you could control other people, and I'm like, you have to give me a reason, because this just sounds so out your ass. Like, why can you control other people at 40%? Why do you suddenly have some sort of weird link to other people that they're in the Matrix? You're like, and that's the thing. Lucy, by the end of this movie, has more abilities than Neo does in the freaking Matrix. At that point, I'm just like, I'm not enjoying this. None of this like is engaging to me.
I still think it's enjoyable. I think you're right about, like, that's why I brought up the Morgan Freeman stuff. Like, I think every time he's on screen and they try to do science stuff, I'm like, this is not working for me. But like, even in the end, I won't spoil it, but like there are scenes in it that I do really enjoy. And like, I like seeing this, you know, this young adult woman who just wants to party, like goes from being like this I don't know, she's like a foreign exchange student or whatever in Taiwan, and she's just out to party all the time, and all of a sudden like transforms into this Superman. but she has this focus and this drive, and it's I enjoy like her experience and her like how everything is playing out according to her plan. And you know, she still does try to hold on to her humanity. There's a character introduced for that, and I think it's still entertaining and still enjoyable to watch, like just to see how things progress as she gets further and further unlocked. But yeah, anytime you try to bring in the science, I'm like, no, not working.
Nah, see,
just because the initial premise isn't good.
No,
so.
the two main problems I have with, or why I disagree with what you just said, is one, I don't think enough of her humanity sticks around, so it's hard to root for anything she's doing because there's no real. It's a very vague goal. It's just kind of there because she has to have a goal, right? It doesn't really feel, and I think, I'm not saying that you couldn't make the goal she has in this work or the main sort of ideas that it's trying to get across work by the end. But this movie is a brisk 90 minutes. It is paced.
It goes real fast.
It is paced like an action movie that really shouldn't have a complex plot, and somehow, like, it's trying to do this story that it should. You know, this movie should be a 3-hour Stanley Kubrick movie to get these ideas across.
I think there is very much some influence from Kubrick in this.
Yeah. But you see what I mean, though? Like, like you could set up the ideas that it ultimately tries to land by the end, and I don't think it does. I think it feels too gimmicky by the end because it's just wrapped up so quickly, and the amount of time it actually spends introducing the philosophical ideas of like what like the meaning of life and existence and like what it is to be human and all these different things. Like, this movie does not have time to explore any of this. And it doesn't get any of it across. It just feels like it's there to just kind of justify like where it's going by the end. But there's no personal, real motivation or goal. Like, once she's already kind of had her revenge, like, it's done. Like her personal goal is gone. And at that point, if you want,
her goal is to survive, and that's all the way through the end because her body is like disintegrating.
I'll talk about more in spoilers. We can't really get into it, but I think like after a certain point in this movie, I don't think like the goals she has or the motivation she has, other than like a broad survival thing, right? I don't think there's
that thing.
Well, no, because it's not like it doesn't play that way though. She doesn't seem to give a shit about anything. She's very uncaring
This I think is where the 2001 comparison comes in. I think this is very much about what's next for humanity. Like, where do we go if we are able to go past our physical form and past our capabilities of where we are right now?
Yeah, and as that, it's a bad movie. It's not fit for that purpose.
I mean, I think it's a fine film. Like, I think it's entertaining. I think it's fun. I think it's. I think these issues are addressed in the film. Like, that's the whole point of the film. Whether or not you think it's successful, then is whatever. It's on you.
It's not on me. It's on the movie for not giving it enough time. Just bringing them up is not a like you want to defend it because you like it, fine. But like, I do not think this movie has the weight behind it to actually deal with any of the ideas that it raises. Right? The first like 20-30 minutes, I'm kind of into it because it's well shot, it's well directed. The way it introduces the character is kind of fun. And there's some really stylistic moments. There's a moment early on where she goes into a hospital. And there's just like a lot of movement in the camera, the way it kind of, well, she walks past the camera and the camera pans to follow her, and then when she stops, the camera moves up and then goes around her, and it feels like a dance. It feels like there's this motion, and you get this sense that she's really surveying the building around her, the layout. She's like really mapping out her geography, and you get this feeling that, much like you do in like other movies where there's not like a reason for it, it's just that the person's meant to be that smart and that much of a badass. But here it's like, no, she's got all these like her senses are all firing on all cylinders, and she's able to process all the information now in a way that she couldn't before. And it really sells that idea. And at that point, I'm kind of interested because I'm like, okay, you're giving me a character who is more capable, but there's rules to what she can do in the world. And then after that, it's just magic. Everything just starts to be magic after that. And there's some visuals in this movie that I think are laugh out bad. There's some stuff towards the end that I laughed at because I think it just looks stupid. Because it doesn't set them up enough to like make it work. I think the ideas in this are the sort of ideas that I want a Kubrick or a David Lynch, or I want a director who is going to like prod my mind and sort of do it with prod my mind with ideas and explore them through nuance, as opposed to this, which is it raises these ideas, but it has the mentality of a Rush superhero movie. Right, that's the actual, like, that's the toolkit that he's using. He's got the toolkit of a simple superhero movie to try and make something that a Kubrick would make in 2001. And it doesn't work. This movie loses me completely after the first, like, 30, 40 minutes. Like, once we're in the back half of this movie, like, I could not care less about this character or what she's doing, because she's not a character anymore. Not really.
Well, I mean, I didn't have that experience watching the film. I thought that she, I enjoyed watching her progress and become this next level thing that, is, I get the idea that, she's able to see things that we can't see because she's, tapped into that ability. And, what it sets up is fine. Like, I understand it looks like magic, and there are moments where I'm just like, that's not really working for me, but I don't think it's just flat out not an enjoyable experience to watch anymore. Like, I still think it's a fun movie.
I just think it's nonsense because there's no rules. They
sort of set up that there are rules.
No, because it keeps getting worse and worse. Like, there's no rules, like, and there's no threat to her. Nothing can touch her.
Yeah, but we don't really know exactly, like, what her plan is. You realize that she isn't really in danger, but it is set up like she is, and in the moments, like, I do feel that way, and then all of a sudden there's a new ability that she has. You're like, okay, then never mind, like, that's not a problem anymore, but it's still like a fun action scene because she's able to do these things.
I don't know. I don't think there's any good action scenes after the first, like, 30 minutes. I don't think there's any good action. I think most of it's pretty just too easy. Everything's too easy after that point.
All right. Well, let's just get into it then.
All right. Okay. Spoilers for Lucy. There is actually, like, and you can feel Besson's trying to do some artistic things, because at the start he does this thing where, as Lucy's, like, been convinced into this little plan that this guy that she's dating's got, because he wants her to deliver this briefcase, and it's clearly illegal, it's clearly shady, and he's clearly scared to go and do it himself. So he's like, no, you go in with the briefcase because they won't be expecting you. And she's like, no. And it's like, no, I'm not doing this. This sounds dodgy. I'm just going to go home. But then he handcuffs her to the briefcase and she has to. And as this is all happening, it kind of every so often intercuts, like, wildlife. Like, she's the prey and there's like a leopard coming in to...
Is it a cheetah?
Is it a cheetah? A cheetah is coming in to, like, get her. And it also does. It also gives her a random bit of trivia that the first ever woman that was named Lucy, and we see, like, in a museum somewhere.
Yeah, I think she's Australopithecus.
Yeah,
is the name.
Which actually does turn out to be set up for something much, much later.
Yeah. It's always what I think of when I hear the name Lucy. It is, honestly. Like, this is a thing that I learned. I'm pretty sure I saw her in one of the museums I went to. So it's always just a thing that I associate the name Lucy with.
You can see the idea that if Lucy's at the dawn of mankind, and this Lucy's going to start our next stage of mankind, kind of idea. I can see what he's doing there. But like the way that, like, the guy at the desk reacts to her asking for this particular guy, the goons coming down, shooting her boyfriend, like, taking her up, like,
yeah, that's a really intense scene. Like, she is, doing the scared really well here. Yeah.
And, like, she's handcuffed to this case the entire time while they're checking what's in it. In fact, there's one point where they don't trust what's inside it, so they actually they tell her to open it, and then they all go outside the room, and there's, like, guys with, like, riot shields in case it's a bomb.
Yeah. And the only person who speaks English, like, we don't know anything that they're saying. Like, there's one translator. There's a guy at the front desk who is translating for her. And we have to trust that he's translating what she's saying correctly. And so he's like, oh, on the phone, like, don't worry, it's safe. But then we see people with shields, and then the main baddie is, like, hiding behind a wall somewhere.
And then, like, they're going to offer her a job. They want her to smuggle some of this blue drug that's in there. They put it in her stomach when she's knocked out, so she's got a big wound on her stomach, and the whole idea is she's going to smuggle it. And it's when she's been held captive. Well, I assume they're waiting for the scars to heal a little bit, because it would look suspicious going onto a plane with, like, a big bandage with blood seeping out of it. One guy tries to, grope her, and she kind of, like, shoos him away, and he gets mad and kicks her in the stomach a couple of times. And would you believe it, this bursts the bag of drugs, and this stuff, like, goes into her system and into her brain. Which even the idea is just like, a bag of this stuff that unlocks her potential. Like, why doesn't someone else do this then? Surely someone else can just like down a bag of this and unlock their potential if they really want to. But yeah, and as soon as this happens, she starts like she basically starts floating at one point. Actually, she's kind of like when she's
like exorcism.
Yeah,
happening. Yeah.
And she's like tied to the pipe in the wall, and she's like sort of like up horizontal, like kicking her legs out at one point. But she goes out and she walks out like she's John Wick and like takes out all the guys who are like guarding this area because they're all eating. And then she sits down and starts shoving her face in the food because she's been locked up for a couple of days.
Yeah, I think she just also is burning so much energy from her brain power, so she just needs to like, refuel. Yeah.
Like the Flash, because his metabolism so quick because he's burning so much fuel.
I mean, I think your brain does require fuel. So now that she's using more of it, she's just shoving food in her mouth. I would have liked to have always seen her with snacks. I think that would have been a good thing to add. A little comedic moment of her just constantly eating.
Yeah, and she goes to the hospital, and this is, there's some really stylistic moments as she's taking control, working at the hospital, and she walks into a surgery. And this is one of the first moments, as much as I otherwise think this scene's alright, and like some of the style in it. She shoots the guy that's getting operated on, and she justifies it afterwards by just sort of coldly saying, oh, you couldn't have saved him anyway. Like, the cancer had already, like, gotten to wherever. And I'm like, okay, that was really cold and dark, but, like, I guess if he was going to die anyway, then it's not that bad. But it did felt really logical. And I suppose that's supposed to... And I wish it dealt with this more. Like, you said there's a character she keeps around later, like a cop, who to remind her of humanity. And I feel like there's definitely, like an interesting idea here. This idea that she's losing her humanity and she's trying to stay tethered to it in some way.
Yeah, because this is the scene where she calls her mother and she has an emotional phone call with them or with her. And while the doctor is performing surgery on her, and she explains, like, I can't feel. Like, she could just turn off the pain sensor now. So it doesn't matter that she's, awake, doesn't have anesthesia. She's pointing a gun at the surgeon the whole time he's working on her.
And she's also unlocked every memory she's ever had. She can now remember everything in detail.
I actually thought that scene was pretty emotional when she's like describing like the warmth of the milk and stuff in her mouth. I'm like, I don't know. It just really got to me. Like, this is like she has the memory of being a baby. I don't know. And feeling like the mother's love, like, baby and mother connection thing.
Yeah, the powers that, the abilities hadn't gone too far for me yet at this point. Like, up until this point, which is maybe 25 minutes in, I'm mostly on board. Because I'm like, okay, she's got these extra abilities, this is an interesting trait. And obviously not this time, but the first time I was thinking, okay, the movies are going to be about her getting back to the main, like, Korean bad guy and taking him down. Then she does it in the next scene. and what's weird about it is she doesn't kill him though, which is just convenient so that he's there later on to come after her. But she could have done. I mean, she
could have, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she's quite happy to kill multiple people later on in the movie, quite willy-nilly without thinking about it. So, but she basically goes home, uses her roommate's laptop to read everything about what might be happening to her, and then, Morgan Freeman's the expert on this shit, so she calls him. And this is where it starts to get a bit wonky for me, because it's like, I can control all types of like signals and waves, so I can like just show up on his TV, I can be in his phone, I can show up on his laptop.
Well, I mean, surely it wouldn't take her very long to learn how to hack anything.
That was one of the things that bugged me the most, actually, is just because she can think super fast doesn't mean her computer can actually keep up with it. Her computer, like her computer's like all the windows are like flashing like super fast. I'm like, no, her computer can't do that. It doesn't matter.
You don't think she's learned how to code?
It's not about coding. The processor, the hardware inside the computer can physically not do this, cannot keep up to this speed.
She might be able to work around it.
Shut up.
She's smarter than you.
This is not about being smart. This is just about physically impossibilities. Okay? Not to mention, this is an 8-year-old computer at this point. Even computers today can't do this.
I mean, they're not fast enough for her because she has to use 2 computers at one time.
So she's like, I'm going to come and see you. And Morgan Freeman's advice, and this is kind of sets up the goal of the movie, is that, well, what do you do with this now? Well, if you're going to like burn out and die in a day because you physically can't exist like this for long, then like any cell, from the start of the dawn of existence, your purpose should be to pass on the knowledge that you accumulate. So she's basically on her way to Paris to meet Morgan Freeman and some other scientists to give them everything she's learned about the universe and science before she dies. That's the goal. She could change her hair color. That's like the next thing I think we can see her do. If she just changes her hair color.
She's able to tap into DNA, I suppose.
It's when she actually starts like becoming a cloud on the plane. She starts dusting.
And her face starts melting.
It's like Thanos has snapped his fingers and she starts to disintegrate. And I'm not just making that joke because it's Scarlett Johansson. I'm like that is kind of what it reminded me of. And she's able to pull it together. But well, she's able to with more drugs, and yes. I like the visual of her hop 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 like this, chomping at the peck of drugs and stuff. It's a very funny visual. She calls a detective in Paris and tells them about the other smugglers who are going to be arriving, so that she can get the drugs from them to last long enough, and also to unlock like all 100%, because every so often in the movie it comes up saying 10%, 20%. This is where we're at.
Yeah.
And it's like okay.
Well, it's it's amplifying things. Like, okay, we see where she's at. Like the limit is obviously going to be 100. So where is she, and how much further does she have to go with her abilities?
Yeah. So the detective's weirded out because she guesses a bunch about him, but when they actually meet up, the bad guys, the Koreans, show up and try to take their drugs back from, even though the guys are like being held in like a holding cell. Scarlett basically just takes everything from them because she makes them levitate. She stops the guy who's got the case from running away, makes all the henchmen levitate, and she just walks up and takes what's hers. like it's nothing. Did you enjoy this?
Yeah, it was like the Darth Vader scene in Rogue One. She just like walks through one at a time and like throws them around with the Force.
Nah, I wasn't feeling any of this. This is like this was off the rails for me at this point.
Well, I mean, this is the story of her becoming Superman. So like the Ubermensch, the next stage. So I think I think her like being able to tap into some sort of like abilities, like being able to move objects with her mind is, makes sense that would be the next progressed whatever thing, the next part of her of her evolution that she's going through.
All I wanted, and part of this maybe is expectations, but even the second time I watched it, this still annoyed me, is my expectations was slick, stylish action movie, and after like 30 minutes, it turns into her making people float away and disintegrating people. In fact, see when she's in the car with a cop and she starts seeing like the phone signals go up like the Matrix code from everyone's phones, and then she starts like sort of like doing that with her hands to like sort of like go through it and like pick out the one she wants. I'm like, this is silly.
Yeah, I agree. That part always kind of irritates me too. Like, I understand what they're trying to convey, that she can see signals and she's able to determine which one is going to be one that's useful to her. Like, even though there's seemingly millions around her, she could still go, this is the one that I need, and so we can focus on that. So it's kind of a difficult thing to shoot without her going like this, like it's some sort of computer screen or like of the future. But so I mean, I agree with you that it's a bit silly, but I understand why it's there. I just don't love it either.
Yeah, I mean, I could get down with some silliness ultimately. If anything, I went into this movie originally thinking there would be some silliness, but I thought it would be more of like a personal character goal, but she feels so unhuman like towards the end, and yeah, she has this goal to pass on the knowledge, but she's not the character we started with, and it doesn't really feel like an arc because the drug completely changed her almost instantly. Like, she tries to cling to her humanity a little bit, at the hospital talking to her mum. But after that, it's gone. Like, she's basically already gone after that. So
she had to mature real fast.
So in terms of a protagonist, it's really hard to kind of like care about her for the rest of the movie. And I think that's a problem. I don't think the movie has the right, like, I think if you're going to give me like a central character who's not a character, like that's where I start comparing it to these other sort of more like omniscient style directors who like sort of create like a tone and a feel, and you feel like you're witnessing some sort of cosmic event rather than a character going through a story, but it's still presented that way though. It's still presented as her just on a mission and she's got a goal and she's going there. And there's villains, and that's the thing. Towards the end, like the Koreans are like getting close, and the main bad guy is like hunting her down. He wants revenge for her coming in and like scaring the shit out of him. And it's like, but at this point we know he's not a threat. There's nothing he can do. Like, what's going to happen if he gets to her in time? She's just going to like snap her finger, and he's just going to go. Like, it'll be like Dr. Manhattan at that point. It'll just be like, bleh, like, splish.
Right. I think he's just so motivated by like, my life is in ruins, and he's got a lot of passion, and he's trying to do something. So I think that's why, like, if this movie took place over a week, I wouldn't buy it. But like, because it takes place in such a short period of time, and he's just like,
my problem is not his motivation. I don't care about why he's wanting to do this. I'm not questioning that. I don't have a problem with that. I'm saying that as an audience, why should we give a shit that he's doing this? Why?
He's still presented as a danger, although we don't really think that he is, because she's tapped into like 99% of her brain by the time he reaches her.
But I feel like he wanted the moment where she reaches 100% and like vanishes into like a higher being when she gets shot at, so that the bullet doesn't hit anything. I feel like he wanted that moment, so we had to have a villain to shoot her. so that there'll be someone to shoot at her when that moment comes. And the moment before that, though, because she explains to the scientists that you think 1 + 1 = 2, but that's not really true. Like, we try and make things sound, and it's a bunch of mumbo jumbo just saying, oh, science as we know it's all wrong, and it's actually
we're looking at things, from the wrong angle, and we want to assign numbers and letters to things, but really it's just stuff, and like you're not seeing the whole picture, And sure, like, we're not there yet, we're taking baby steps.
And then she turns into like goo, like symbiote tendrils and goo, like venoms, like goo, like going across the floor, and then builds a USB stick ultimately that has all our data in it that Morgan Freeman can look at.
I like to think of this as a precursor to her, and she just becomes an OS system.
Yeah, of course. While she's strapped into the chair, though, we get this like sequence where she travels through time and looks at different places.
I love this sequence. I have a feeling you hate it, but I love it.
I do hate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree that the CGI of Lucy is not great in it, but like I tolerate it in order to for the whole scene. I actually really think that this is quite a neat moment for
her. She goes back in time, she sees different civilizations, she meets the original Lucy, the very original Lucy.
After meeting dinosaurs.
Almost touches her even, and then so we get like this ultra CG, like there's like nebulas like blowing into each other, and there's like all sorts of like gaseous clouds in space, and zooming past planets, and we see the Earth explode, and like all these things happen, and it all just basically goes round and round and round, and then ultimately it's like counting up to her hitting 100%, which happens just as the villain shoots at her. So then the bullet doesn't hit anything, and her clothes are just there. She's ascended. Do you know what this is? This is like the really goofy kind of dumb action movie version of a certain character in an early episode of Babylon 5 ascending to a higher being. That's what this is.
This is the Ironheart movie.
Yes, this is the Hollywood action version of Ironheart.
Actually, there was a really funny episode. Story. They're all pretty funny. Episode of Star Trek Lower Decks where a character wants to ascend, and that's it makes fun of a lot of these tropes, especially that of course that we've seen in Star Trek and other science fiction before. But yeah, I mean, I get the idea of she is gone like corporeal. She's no longer, she's tapped the full use of her brain, and now she's able to basically live forever as away from the physical body, away from the physical form, which is the only true way to like live forever.
Yeah, because she's everywhere, like, because the cop says, "Where is she?" And then like he looks at his phone and it says, "I'm everywhere."
His Nokia. Yes. I don't know if it's a Nokia, but yeah, his smartphone.
Yeah, that felt a bit weird because this is 2014, so I mean there should actually still be smartphones around, but whatever.
Yeah, well maybe their police office isn't like fully funded.
Yeah.
With the latest equipment for the latest
That
technology.
that Paris police paycheck just isn't that good. So he's got an old phone.
This is still like the transition that people are going through. Some people are holding on to their flip phones. Like I'm not ready. I'm not ready for a smartphone. I don't need my phone to play music.
Yeah, that's what it is. He's still got an MP3 player and he's not willing to give that up. So he's like,
right,
no.
Like he invested in his Zune, so he's holding on to it.
Yeah,
I had a Zune actually. I really liked it.
I never had a Zune, I must say. I avoided that.
I was like, oh, this is way better than an iPod. I didn't get an iPod for a long time.
I think part of my problem is part of it's the expectation of what the movie is in advance, but I also think the opening of the movie sets me up for a certain type of movie that I think the movie then drifts away from. Like that opening where she's convinced to go into the drop off and then she gets hit, taken by the bad guy and the whole like open the case and like that.
It's very tense. Very good.
It's very
really
tense.
Really
it's well directed. It feels like I'm stepping into like a really solid action thriller where this character is going to become strong and not be this timid by the end and not be this scared. But the problem is, like, when I enjoy that story in something else, like the example that we go back to a lot is the Terminator, right? Like, Sarah Connor starts off, she just wants to go out on a Saturday night and dance and stuff, and then over the course of the film, she sort of grows up.
Tech noir.
Yeah, Tech Noir. That's the name of the bar.
On Pico.
And she gains this strength. She gets self-confident. She's willing to fight back. She, the first time the Terminator comes to her, she just sits there, deer in the headlights, can't move, frozen with fear. And then by the end of the film, she's willing to run. She's willing to fight for her life. She's willing to like stay alive. But it's a character journey. It's a character arc. And I don't think Lucy has a character arc in this. There's no character arc. She just switches to this cold, emotionless person, and there's no fun or engagement or anything from her. I don't feel anything from her at all.
I wonder if it was a different actress, because we know Scarlett Johansson and we know like the types of characters that she plays, and she's already been cast as Black Widow. I think this movie came out and everyone's like, see, we want a Black Widow movie, and then we got one like 7 years later.
Yeah, we got a mediocre movie much later. Too late.
Yeah, it was a fine film, but anyway, I think that what was my point? I can't remember.
Sorry.
I'm only using 6% of my brain.
So I do think that the start of the movie sets me up for it, and it's not to say that I can't enjoy a movie that goes down different paths. I mean, you've heard me praise God told me to many a time, and that's a left turn after left turn.
I love when a movie just embraces its crazy, and just goes with it.
I think part of the problem with this is that like I kind of just wanted the movie it gave me in the first 10-15 minutes. I wanted that to play out like a normal movie from that point on.
Yeah, okay. So I think what I was saying before is that because we know Scarlett Johansson and she tends to always play these tough, strong women, when we see her in the beginning, she's sort of playing against type. And maybe we just don't buy her as that character, so that her arc doesn't really seem like it's, well, yeah, she's Scarlett Johansson. She's always tough. She's always confident. She's always like cool under pressure.
Nah, I disagree. Not because I think it's a bad point, because you're right, she is playing against type in that opening. Like, I agree with that. Like, that's very much against what she normally does. But there's just no arc. This is not because it's Scarlett Johansson. There is no arc. She just switches to this cold character. And I can't care about her at that point. Like, I find it impossible to give a shit about. Like because
you're not curious about what happens to her, like, as the events progress.
I think this comes back to the science being nonsense, because I already think it's stupid, and then once she starts doing abilities that I think are stupid, like everything about like where it's going at the end, just it's all built on stupidity. So I can't get into it. Because even when she's sitting with the scientists and saying, oh, you think 1 + 1 = 2, but that's not true at all. Like, even that, like, all of it's nonsense. There's never a part where I feel like it's making a good point. It's just mumbo jumbo to justify your plot. Because this is the thing, like, in another movie, a better written movie, and this isn't, and if this was just like an action movie that was well directed, it wouldn't need to have like a good point to make. It'd be okay. It didn't have that, but in a better written movie, you would use, even if the ideas weren't like accurate to science, right? The philosophy that comes from it would be making a point about humanity or be making a point about something, but there is no point to what it's making here. Really, it's just kind of generally saying, oh, there's so much more to us than we understand, and here's some mumbo jumbo to say that we've just never understood properly, and that's it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think a movie needs to have that. I mean, I don't think 2001 really has that. I think 2001 is supposed to be like this, just an experience of watching, like, what is the next stage of man? And where do we go from this point if we need to, in order to reach that? I think this movie is trying to attempt that very much.
2001 is constantly thought-provoking, though.
Oh, yeah. Of course it is.
This movie doesn't provoke a thing because everything that it suggests is stupid. And you know it's stupid.
I mean, I think some of the things, yeah, like they're all kind of dumb, but like they're... and some of the visuals don't help it. But like I understand what they're trying to do.
See when she's in the chair, it's before I think she starts time traveling, and like some light starts shooting out of her mouth. That made me laugh. That looks so stupid. Yeah,
because she like IVs all the rest of the blue drugs into her body. Yeah, it was a little stupid.
Yeah, I thought that was really stupid. But like, no, I'm not saying a movie does need to have that. But if you're going to tackle these big ideas, then
you want David Lynch or Stanley Kubrick to do it. We already heard that point.
I wasn't going to say that again, but yeah, like, but even if you like, regardless of who's doing it, you need to like actually present it as a big idea, and this movie just isn't smart enough to pull off those ideas. It just isn't. Like, it's just like I would have been happy with just a slick, well directed, tense action movie with a little bit of silliness to like sort of justify why what's happening is happening, and I'll just be like, yeah, fine, whatever, it's an action movie, I can roll with it. But I can't just say it's an action movie because it stops being that. It goes into this direction where it's trying to be this other thing, and I don't think it remotely succeeds as that. So in the end, I'm like, I do think it's well directed in places, especially, you know, near the start where I'm more into what's going on. But yeah, like I went into this not really remembering where it went. I just remember not liking it. So when I watched it again today for this, and it started getting to the stuff I really hated, I was like, this is why I didn't like this movie.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise, so.
Well, but you tried. You failed.
Well, I'm trying to justify what I think of the film and why, you know, the things that don't work for you, like, I'm fine with. It's just, we're at a standstill.
Yeah. And yeah, you know, I'm all for like more movies with
big ideas.
With female leads who are tough, who are strong, who are capable, and obviously having an arc of going from someone who's scared and like doesn't know what situation they're in and is kind of forced into it against their will, and then becoming strong. Like, I love those types of stories, you know, regardless of gender, really. You can have like a meek man who's like scared and grows strong. Like, that's the thing.
We don't really get a lot of those. It's always women, isn't it?
It usually is. I mean, you can sort of apply it a little bit to like, you know, like Neo in the Matrix, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not as strongly, but it is there. Like, you can definitely track it a little bit. I guess the point is that they don't start off as
yeah, I mean, we don't get a lot of sci-fi movies like that. We tend to get guys who are like, I want revenge for my family, so I'm going to grab a gun and start shooting and killing people. Like, you know, those kind of like weak men who become men because they have a gun, and that's, you know, not a great message.
Yeah. So I just wish I cared, but I couldn't care about anything after she goes to see the main bad guy. From that point on, like, once she starts talking to Morgan Freeman, my interest in the movie just started plummeting, and that was it. That was me.
I would say like I mean, I agree that all the stuff with Morgan Freeman, like, I'm just not into it. Like, mostly because it reminds you of what the premise is, and it makes you think, well, it's not real science, so I hate it. But and also Morgan Freeman's character is not good in this.
But surely to that point though as well, every time it comes up saying 20%, That's also reminding
Well,
you.
I don't mind that because like it is like building up the tension, like just how much we've progressed. Like they've established, okay, this is the rule. This is the rule that we're following in the movie. Okay, I accept. I'm going to move on. But don't try to justify it with science because it's not going to work. Keep your Morgan Freeman out of this.
If you give me this premise, my assumption would be that, okay, you get better at doing a lot of things, you become smarter, you become, your reflexes are better because maybe you're able to process all the information around you better and things like that. But once you start just like having all these extra magic powers, to me it starts being like, well, why are you accessing more of your brain lead to this? How does this give you this ability? I don't, that just doesn't make any sense to me. If I accept the fundamental basis of the premise, which is stupid on its own, but if I just roll with that, I still don't understand why it leads to she can control everything around her, like she's in the Matrix. Like what are our brains? Is it because we're all just connected? We're all just atoms that reform and whatever. Is that it? She's just connected to everything now because she's unlocked.
Well, I mean, perhaps like if she's able to see like beyond what we can see, then she could see like atoms, or even just tap into some sort of like the force is the wrong word to use, but she's able to like manipulate things around her because she can see them and she sees how things can interact. Like even when we move through, space, we're not moving through nothing. We're moving through air. There's stuff, all around us. We're not in a vacuum.
I think it had to be more restrained, even if you're going to go into like a specific type of ability. I think it had to be more restrained for me to get on board with the idea that you can set up a mechanic that can then be used as a tool later on. Because like I say, later on she can just, snap her fingers, make people fly away. Nothing's a threat. If you set up a tool that she can use though, and we can understand how it can be used in a scene where there's danger, then that could be far more thrilling, I think. Like, set up that she can, I don't know, let's say her mind works quick enough that she can sort of predict where everyone's going to go. So she could almost do like a Quicksilver in the X-Men. It's not quite super speed, but she could almost like move things around to make it all work. And so there'd be like some fundamental rules where we could understand what she's doing and then achieving it. But her just like going whoosh and away you go. It's like, oh, she just did a thing and there they went. It's just not satisfying. Like there's nothing to like latch on to for me. So yeah.
Okay.
All right, I guess we can rate it. And you know what? This is like the shortest episode of The Ace that we have done in quite some time, and I think it's because the movie doesn't have that much to offer. What would you like to rate the film, Tara?
I do enjoy the film. I have problems with it. I like to play good cop when you're being bad cop because, I do think the movie's worth defending. I don't think it's a bad film. But I am going to give it a 6.
I love how you sounded more positive than that the entire time because you were fighting me.
Well, I mean, you are being a bit cruel.
I'm not being a bit cruel.
I think you go a little over the top sometimes. That's all right.
I'm being completely honest. I'm trying to explain why I feel the way I do, and that's it. That's all. But yes, my rating. I do think it's well directed in places. I think Scarlett is good. Admittedly, the emotionless like sort of like character she becomes, like it's not really her fault. It's just what the character is. But I do think she's good early on when everything else is better. I'm not actually going to go that much slower. Bizarrely, I think I'm only going to go down to a 4.5. Which is, I do think like it's obviously nice. It's nice enough to look at. There's some good stuff early on. I just think that it goes off the rails and part of it may be a personal taste thing, but I just none of where it goes is what I wanted from what the movie started with. I just like I was like, it's that thing where you can just see it going down a path and you're just like, what is this movie? Like I don't want this. I don't want this anymore. And that's I felt that way the original time I saw it back in 2014, and I felt that way again today. So, which is good.
Okay.
So, but I mean, I'm glad at least in this case, like I know it's not just a first time watch thing, because I thought it might be. I thought, maybe now when I watch it, because I know it's going to go a certain way and it's going to get more fantastical, that I'll get into it, but didn't work.
I'm surprised we started with this movie for Luc Besson and not the obvious other big sci-fi film that he's done.
Have we not done Fifth Element?
Did we do Fifth Element and I just forgot?
We may not have. I don't know. Maybe we didn't do Fifth Element. I can't remember. I'll have to check. I'll have to check.
I mean, we've been doing this like 3 years now.
Yeah, I know. I'll have to check the tape. It'll be 3 years in like April, I think. Maybe May? April, May? Around then. A spoiler, I guess. I like Fifth Element a lot more than this.
As do I.
Multi-pass.
So I'm glad this movie came out when it did, because I needed it.
What's so funny, actually, is Fifth Element has Mila Jovovich, who I like in Fifth Element, but hate everything else she's ever been in. And Scarlett here's the opposite. Scarlett's been in tons of great movies, but I don't like this.
Sure.
So, you know. Yeah, there you go. Also, this came out the same year. I mean, actually, it's funny. I kept comparing, I brought up Kubrick and Lynch. Another director I could have brought up was Glazer, who directed Under the Skin, which is the same year as this with Scarlett. A movie with a tone that felt like it was tackling big ideas in a much more art house way. I guess that's what I'm saying. I guess what I'm saying is the ideas this movie tackles, I want an art house movie of, not
an action film.
Not an action film. Yeah, I guess that's all fun. I guess I can boil everything I said in the last 50 minutes down to that. But there you go. So yeah, let us know what you think. You at home or in your car or in the bathtub. Probably the bathtub. I think a lot of people listen to this in the bathtub.
Makes sense. Some
candles, make a nice little relaxing evening out of it. But yes, thank you for enjoying the show. Let us know what you think of Lucy in the comments and stuffs. Of course, I'm going to make Tara pose for the thumbnail. That's a usual thing. 3, 2, 1, pose.
That's my best Lucy poster.
Tara, why don't you tell me about Patreon whilst I check what's coming up next?
That's right, Peter. If you enjoy our reviews, please check out our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/MildFuzzTV. And if you donate as low as $1 per month, you will actually get access to bonus episodes that we do for the Ace. So you can check out what we think of The Guyver, our latest episode that went up last month. And I don't think we've decided what we're doing this month. Maybe a Tremors sequel, because we've been working through the Tremors franchise.
I think Tremors 5 is penciled in currently, yeah.
Yeah, so, we did the first one on the main show. If you want to see our thoughts on the sequels, $1, you get access to Tremors 2 through 4 and plus a boatload of other episodes. Yep. If you donate $5 per month, you'll be able to access these episodes a day early, and you get to decide what we watch. Once a month, you get to vote. Lucy was a vote, so head on over and check that out. Thank you.
There you go. So next week, we're actually doing a new film from last year that has been on my to-do list. Something that's been on our to-do list. From the director of Raw is Titan. And I have heard very interesting, positive things about Titan. So
I've heard very positive, interesting things about Raw.
Raw's very good. I recommend Raw. It's not a sci-fi movie, but I recommend Raw. I have heard Titan's like a movie that is ultimately science fiction, but it's really hard to place in a genre for a lot of it, so it should be an interesting watch next week.
Sounds fun.
Maybe it'll even serve as a nice comparison to Lucy from what I've heard of it, actually.
I really don't know anything except for the poster.
Sure. So that's coming up next. And then we have something a bit more silly old school after that, and then some other things. So the stuff coming.
I don't even know what it is. I'm excited.
So yeah. I'll also thank our Patreon producers for the month. So thank you to Tyler Hess, Cindy Palacios, David Short, Board Now, Christopher Moy, David Brown, Al Treisman, and Alison M4 Dice. I usually say that before I get Tara to tell you about Patreon, but I had to get her to kill time whilst I checked what was coming up next. So those are the producers, one of the higher tiers over at Patreon. And of course, that is about it. Get us on the Twitters at Screams Midnight. So yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed the show and our disagreement about Lucy. But thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching science fiction and computer at Salsa.